Listen carefully. You have been running for a long time now, not with your body, but with your mind. Every morning begins the same way. The chase starts before your eyes are fully open. Chasing approval, chasing certainty, chasing the life you were told would be yours if only you worked harder, wanted more, sacrificed more, refused to rest. And yet here you are, still tired, still waiting, still wondering why everything you hold so tightly keeps slipping through your hands. But what if the problem was never your effort? What if the very force pushing you forward is the same force keeping you trapped? This is not a story about motivation. This is not about hustling harder, waking earlier, or becoming more efficient at exhausting yourself. This is something older than ambition, something deeper than discipline, something far more powerful than force. This is the philosophy of release. It is the wisdom warriors learned in defeat, monks discovered in silence, and rulers only understood when power failed them. It is the truth that victory does not always belong to the one who pushes hardest, but to the one who knows when to stop pushing. In the next few minutes, you will not simply be inspired. You will be confronted. 10 lessons, each one stripping away something false, each one returning you to something real. So breathe, settle in. You do not have to chase everything. Some things only arrive when you stop running. Lesson 1. The exhausted hunter in a museum in Vienna hangs a painting most people barely notice. It was painted in 1565 by Peter Bruegel the Elder. It shows hunters returning through a frozen landscape. Their dogs lag behind them. Their shoulders are bent. Their spears hang like burdens, not tools. Below them, life goes on. Children skate on the ice. Fires burn in chimneys. The village lives, warm and full, untouched by the hunter's fatigue. The painting is called Hunters in the Snow. And if you look at it long enough, something begins to ache inside you, because you recognize them. We were taught early that life rewards pursuit. That if we wanted something enough, if we disciplined ourselves enough, if we stayed hungry enough, the future would eventually surrender. So we learned to hunt. We hunted love. We hunted status. We hunted success. We hunted the feeling of finally being enough. We sharpened our methods. We turned longing into strategy. We called it ambition. We called it discipline. We called it growth. But almost no one asked the obvious question: what does endless hunting do to the hunter? There is an old story about Xerxes, the Persian king, who built bridges across the Hellespont so his army could invade Greece. A storm destroyed them. In rage, he ordered the sea to be whipped as if reality itself had insulted him. That is what uncontrolled pursuit becomes. A war not just against failure, but against the nature of life itself. And though Xerxes crossed, conquered, and burned Athens, he later watched his navy destroy itself in the narrow straits of Salamis, not because the Greeks were stronger, but because they understood what he did not. Force can collapse under its own weight. Stillness can outlast momentum. How many times have you done the same? How many times have you wanted something so badly that you stopped acting from wisdom and started acting from fear? A relationship you overextended yourself to save. A career you kept shrinking yourself to fit. A friendship you held long after it became heavy instead of warm. The Stoics had a word for this suffering: desire for what is not yours to control. Epictetus, who lived much of his life in slavery, saw this clearly. He wrote, "Do not seek for events to happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do happen, and your life will go smoothly." That is not passivity. It is clarity. There are always two worlds, the world as it is, and the world you insist it should be. Most suffering comes from living almost entirely in the second one. And here is the cruel part. Your brain is built to reward the chase more than the capture. Dopamine peaks in anticipation, not fulfillment. Which means you can spend your whole life addicted to pursuit, mistaking that addiction for meaning. You were built to survive by seeking. But you were never meant to build your philosophy on seeking. The hunters in Bruegel's painting are not failures because they tried, But the painting asks a question many of us are afraid to hear. What if the warmth you were searching for was already in the valley below? What if the life you wanted was not ahead of you, but beneath the obsession that kept pulling you away from it? You cannot receive what life offers while your hands are still clenched around what you demand. Lesson 2. The silence of Hadrian's Wall in northern England. A stone wall stretches across the land for 73 miles. Hadrian ordered its construction in 122 AD. It was not just a fortification. It was a statement. This is where we stop. Rome had spent generations expanding, conquering, reaching farther, taking more. But Hadrian saw something the emperors before him had refused to see. An empire that never stops growing eventually collapses under the weight of what it cannot hold. So he chose restraint. He consolidated instead of conquering. He observed instead of lunging. And in that restraint, Rome enjoyed one of its most stable periods. We live in a culture that has declared war on waiting. Everything arrives instantly, or we call it failure. Food, entertainment, answers, attention, validation, all accelerated to the point that patience now feels unnatural. But patience is not emptiness. Patience is a form of strength. The Greeks had a word for the right moment. Kairos. Not time as it passes, but time as it ripens. An archer understands this. You do not release because you are impatient. You release because the moment is right. Too early, and the shot is wasted. Too late, and the chance is gone. There is an old Roman story about Fabius Maximus, the general mocked as the delayer. While Hannibal destroyed Roman armies in open battle, Fabius refused to give him what he wanted. He waited. He studied. He disrupted. He held back. Rome hated him for it. Then Rome ignored him, rushed into battle, and lost 70,000 men at Cannae in a single day. The disaster came the moment they stopped waiting. So ask yourself, what are you trying to force right now? A relationship? A career move? A transformation? A timeline you invented and now worship? Patience is not doing nothing. It is refusing to spend your energy before the moment is ready. Stillness is not weakness. It is discipline without panic. Stop rushing the stone. Some things can only be built at the speed truth requires. Lesson 3. The monk who burned his maps in Tibetan monasteries. Monks spend weeks creating intricate mandalas from colored sand. Every grain is deliberate, every pattern exact. And when the work is complete, they sweep it away. Not carelessly, not bitterly. Reverently, because the teaching is simple, the beauty was real. The effort mattered. But it was never meant to be possessed. Most adults are still carrying maps drawn by a younger version of themselves. By this age, I should be here. My life should look like this. Love should have happened this way. Success should feel like this. My body, my home, my future, all of it should match the image I was given. Then, life refuses the map. The relationship ends. The career disappoints. The self you expected to become never fully arrives. And instead of mourning the map, most people keep trying to force reality back into it. That is where suffering hardens. There is a kind of grief that comes not from losing what you had, but from losing what you expected to have. And that grief is often invisible. But it shapes entire lives. To let go is not to stop caring. It is to stop demanding that life obey a version of the future that no longer exists. The map is not the territory. It never was. What if the life in front of you is not a ruined version of the plan? What if it is simply different terrain? You do not need to destroy your hope, but you may need to release your blueprint. The river is waiting for your sand. Lesson 4. The emperor's empty room. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire under siege, plague, betrayal, war, death, exhaustion. And yet in his private writings, he kept returning to one idea: you have power over your mind, not outside events. That is not a slogan. It is a survival strategy. Modern people often imagine peace as something waiting on the other side of solved problems. When this is fixed, I'll relax. When that ends, I'll be okay. When life settles down, I'll finally feel calm. But life does not settle down for long. One difficulty leaves, another arrives. Peace built on favorable conditions is not peace. It is temporary relief. Marcus understood that the only stable refuge is internal, not because the outer world does not matter, but because it will never stop changing. The Stoics believed there is an inner ruling faculty, a place inside from which judgment, interpretation, and response arise. That room is where freedom lives. If you do not govern that room, every external storm gets to move in. Most people are not destroyed by events themselves. They are exhausted by residue, unprocessed irritation, old fear, lingering resentment, constant mental noise. You think that fog is your personality. It is not. It is buildup. Your inner room needs maintenance, not perfection, not performance. Attention. The world may remain chaotic, but not every storm deserves entry into the place where you actually live. Everything else is weather. Lesson 5. What the desert knows in the deep desert, silence becomes a presence. Not empty silence. Weighted silence. When the noise of civilization disappears, voices, traffic, screens, endless input, something else begins to emerge. Not fantasy. Not mysticism. Accuracy. The desert does not flatter you. It reveals you. That is why so many people fear silence. Because silence is where the truths we keep outrunning finally catch up. The question you have avoided. The grief you buried beneath productivity. The truth about your work, your relationships, your direction. All of it becomes louder when everything else goes quiet. Modern life has pathologized stillness. Any empty moment must be filled. A commute becomes content. A walk becomes stimulation. A pause becomes a problem. But neuroscience now confirms what contemplative traditions understood centuries ago. When external noise stops, deeper mental processing begins. Silence is not the absence of work. It is where the deeper work finally starts. You do not need to escape to the Sahara, but you do need spaces where nothing is performing for your attention. Because if you never get quiet, you will keep making important decisions with a mind drowned in static. The silence has not disappeared. It is still there beneath everything. Waiting, the desert has always been speaking. You have just been too surrounded to hear it. Lesson 6. The weight of iron. A master swordsmith does not trust steel that has not been tested. The metal is folded, heated, hammered, and folded again, not to damage it, but to reveal it. Each cycle exposes impurity. Each strike makes the blade more honest. Human emotion works the same way. Stoicism was never about becoming numb. It was not the denial of feeling. It was the refinement of feeling. The unexamined emotion is not truth. It is reaction. Fear may be accurate, or it may be an old wound speaking in a new room. Anger may reveal injustice, or it may reveal pride. Desire may point toward what matters or toward what is merely soothing. Emotion is data, but only if it is examined. Suppression is not discipline. Suppression is a hidden fracture. Real emotional strength begins when you allow yourself to feel fully without surrendering the authority to interpret what you feel. That means asking, what is this really about? What value has been touched? What story have I attached to this sensation? Is this fear a warning or a memory? That is the forge. Feel, examine, integrate. Again and again, until your emotional life becomes less theatrical and more truthful. A well-forged blade is not the blade that never faced heat. It is the blade that was honest enough to survive it. Lesson 7. The lighthouse keeper's paradox. A lighthouse does not chase ships. It does not beg to be seen. It does not scan the horizon in desperation. It stands. It shines. and those who need it orient themselves by its light. There is a deep law in human life hidden beneath social behavior. People are drawn not merely to attention, but to groundedness, not to performance, but to coherence. The people you genuinely respect are usually not the ones demanding admiration. They are the ones least organized around being approved of. They are not cold. They are not detached in the shallow sense. They are sufficient. Their interest in others is real, but it is not hungry. Their generosity is not bargaining. Their presence does not ask to be constantly confirmed. That is why it feels powerful. The Stoics called this self-sufficiency, not total independence from everyone, but freedom from making your inner stability dependent on outcomes you cannot control. If your worth depends on being chosen, praised, understood, admired, or constantly wanted, then your peace is always in someone else's hands. But when you have done the harder work, released the chase, built the inner room, practiced silence, tempered your emotions, something changes. You stop signaling. You stop managing your image. You stop over-explaining your value. And then the quality of what comes toward you changes too. Depth recognizes depth. Integrity recognizes integrity. One lighthouse recognizes another. Stop trying to be seen. Become steady enough to be found. Lesson 8. The river that stopped fighting a river does not argue with rock. It does not waste itself trying to overpower every obstacle in its path. It yields, redirects, disappears underground, reemerges elsewhere. And because it does not insist on one rigid route, it eventually reaches the sea. This is what true detachment looks like. Not apathy, not withdrawal, not pretending not to care. Detachment is full participation without the death grip. It is loving without trying to imprison, working without attaching your identity to the result, showing up completely without demanding that reality reward you on your timeline. There is a difference between holding and grasping. Holding says, "This matters deeply, and I will care for it well." Grasping says, "If this changes or leaves, I disappear with it." That is where suffering begins. The mind believes that constant vigilance protects what matters, so it monitors, checks, replays, obsesses. But in most modern situations, that vigilance does not preserve peace. It destroys it. The more tightly you grip, the less fluid you become. The less fluid you become, the more every obstacle feels like a threat to your identity. The Stoics practice something like this: do everything fully within your control and release the rest. That is not indifference. That is sanity. Water still moves with force. It still has direction. It simply refuses to become rigid. Stop trying to break the canyon. Learn how to move. Lesson 9. The gardener's heresy in Burgundy. Young grapevines are often denied easy water. Not neglected, not abandoned. Watched carefully but not indulged. Why? Because a vine that receives surface water grows shallow roots. It survives, even thrives for a while, but it never reaches depth. A vine forced to search sends its roots downward into limestone and clay, into the hidden mineral layers that give great wine its character. That depth cannot be rushed, and it cannot be faked. Human beings are not so different. Some forms of depth are only born in difficulty. Not all suffering is noble. Not every wound makes you wiser. Some pain simply harms. That is true. But it is also true that the deepest compassion, resilience, sobriety, and spiritual weight often come from places where easy answers never reached. The person who has suffered and stayed open does not love in theory. They love with roots. The person who has lost and continued does not speak of endurance like an idea. They embody it. This is why the ancient idea of loving fate is so demanding. It does not mean calling pain good. It means releasing the endless argument with what has already happened. Because the argument changes nothing. It only keeps you exiled from the present. Maybe this season is not punishment. Maybe it is depth. Maybe the delay is not abandonment. Maybe roots are going down where no one can yet see them. You do not need false certainty. You only need the courage not to confuse hidden growth with emptiness. Trust the underground work. Lesson 10. The last star, when you look at the stars, you are not seeing the present. You are seeing light that began its journey years, sometimes centuries, ago. Some of the stars you admire may already be gone. What reaches you is their old light. Now consider how often you relate to yourself in exactly the same way. You keep calling yourself by names shaped in the past. The anxious one, the rejected one, the one who failed, the one who missed the chance, the one who is always behind. But that may be old light. You may be looking at a version of yourself that no longer truly exists. This is the final lesson. The peace you seek is not somewhere else. It is not waiting at the end of one more achievement, one more transformation, one more proof of worth. It is here underneath the noise, the fear, the identity built around striving. Everything in these lessons points back to this. The end of chasing. The patience to wait. The courage to burn the map. The building of the inner room. The silence. The forging. The lighthouse. The river. The roots. All of it has been preparation for remembering what was never absent. There is a still point inside you. Not outside the turning world, but at its center. The axis, not the escape. The part of you that remains even when everything else changes. The part that knows when something is false. The part that recognizes what nourishes you and what diminishes you. The part that has always known your real direction. It is still there, not damaged, not erased, only buried beneath noise, urgency, fear, and performance. You do not need to create it. You only need to uncover it. And from that place, something remarkable happens. You stop begging life to prove your worth. You stop forcing what does not open. You stop mistaking tension for progress. You stop chasing what can only arrive in stillness. The real things do not come because you hunted them into submission. They come because you became quiet enough to receive them, like starlight. It does not rush. It does not plead. It gives what it is. It crosses impossible darkness without panic. And in time, it arrives. So let this be the last thing you hear. You do not have to run anymore. You do not have to grip so tightly. You do not have to force your life into being. Relax. What is truly yours does not need to be chased. It only needs space to reach you. And it will.